was going to talk about the psychological impact of victims from trafficking, but we don't have time. So what I would like to do is introduce our fellow director, Captain Ali, where we're going to be talking about the booklet launch. Because I must confess, even though we all had a part in this, Captain Ali had the biggest part in this booklet. So please put your hands together for Ali Javed.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I'll start with, in the name of God, the most benevolent, the most merciful, for allowing us to be here today. We have a very diverse group of people here today, and we are talking about a very difficult topic. And before I start the topic about understanding and addressing increased vulnerabilities, I just want to thank Sheikh Ramzi and Dr. Saf Buxi for helping this organisation get off the ground. It's been a slow start, we've hit our obstacles, but we're getting there slowly but surely, and the acknowledgements are on page 1, if anyone wants to have a look at them. They are there. Let me still dim the lights a little bit so we can see the screen. I think that's a little bit better. So, as we know, human trafficking, it's one of the most serious and urgent human rights offences and violations that is facing the world today, affecting millions of people globally and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people locally. It devastates lives, shatters communities, and it strips individuals of their freedom, dignity, and basic human rights. But the true gravity of human trafficking becomes even more apparent and more pronounced in times of crises. Whether it's natural disasters, armed conflicts, or global pandemics like the one we've just experienced, it is in these times of moments of chaos and upheaval that traffickers exploit the confusion and vulnerability of displaced populations, taking advantage of the weakened structures of government and the desperation of those in survival mode. It's during these moments of crisis that human trafficking flourishes, preying on the vulnerable, making it an already dire situation even worse. What is crisis, though? Can anyone tell us what crisis means? No? So the Oxford Dictionary says a crisis is a time of great danger, difficulty, or doubt, when important decisions must be made or problems must be solved. Well, what sort of problems? The UN defines a humanitarian crisis as an event or a series of events that represent a critical threat to health, safety, security, or well-being of a community or other large group of people. So let's explore the type of crises that contribute to human trafficking. First, we have natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, floods. These cause widespread damage to infrastructure, displacing large populations. These events often overwhelm local and national governments, decaying recovery efforts, leaving vulnerable people without basic services such as housing, healthcare, protection, security, and in the immediate aftermath, traffickers will exploit the chaos and target those who are displaced, those who are separated from their families, or those who are seeking aid. The longer-term impacts, such as the loss of livelihood and economic instability, and also increased vulnerability as individuals who are affected in major regions who may be forced to migrate or seek alternative means of survival, making them a very easy prey for traffickers. I hope this works. This is a video here of the Haiti earthquake in 2010, where we had 1.5 million people were displaced, were left homeless, living in unsafe temporary camps with poor sanitation, limited access to clean water. Many remained in precarious housing for many years. We had health crisis, over 10,000 people killed, mental health issues and post-traumatic stress disorders, people's livelihoods, their businesses, their ways of making income and their money. We had social and emotional impact. Many issues. Migration, of course, is a very big issue. And Haiti continues to struggle with recovery to this very day. We had the Pakistan floods in 2022. 33 million people were affected. 8 million people were displaced from their homes, and many were forced to live in temporary shelters in open areas of very poor conditions. And this is still to this day, 2 years on, and it still hasn't improved. We've had widespread waterborne diseases are growing from this. And I tell you this not just because of the crisis, because these are places where, and these are situations where traffickers like to exploit. We've had a disruption to education, livelihoods are gone, environmental impact, all of these things have to be talked about. Millions of people are still struggling today. Oh, we have one more. Armed conflicts. Okay, this is a very difficult one to talk about, but because it's rampant today. Armed conflicts, wars, and refugee crisis. We can probably speak for hours and hours and have many events about this particular subject. But armed conflicts, wars, they create the ideal conditions for human trafficking. The breakdown of law enforcement, border control, social services. It allows traffickers to operate with relative impunity. Armed groups often engage in trafficking directly using forced labor, child soldiers, and sex trafficking to fund their trafficking directly and to fund their programs going on. In addition to the refugee crisis that stems from conflicts, they create large groups of displaced people who lack protection and resources, and traffickers target refugees, offering false promises of safe passage, work, shelter, obviously to exploit them. The complexity of these crimes makes it very difficult for authorities to track and protect victims. Today there are over 35 armed conflicts around the world. Actually, sorry, that's more armed conflicts in Africa only. 21 in Asia, 7 in Europe, 6 in South and Central America. Each one of these represents countless lives longing for peace. And since 9/11, millions of people living in war zones have also been displaced by war. The US post-9/11 wars have forcibly displaced at least 38 million people. We talk about smuggling, we talk about trafficking. Where are these 38 million people going to go? Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Sudan, Ukraine, Philippines, Libya, Syria. Do I need to continue? The number exceeds the total displaced by every war since 1900, except during World War II. The war in Ukraine. In 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, and it had widespread and devastating impacts on the population. Not only were 14 million people displaced, 8 million of those people would flee the country completely. And where did they go? Into Europe, and even some on our own doorsteps. Casualties, injuries, tens of thousands of people were killed, injured. We've had economic devastation, health crises, education disruption. And during the fleeing and the evacuation of Ukraine, there were thousands of attempts of unregistered people trying to offer safe passage, trying to offer their help, their food, possibility for work, to live and shelter. And obviously, if these people aren't registered, we don't know where they're going. And we're going to come up to a little later a bit of news about what's happened. The Rohingya crisis in Myanmar. This has been happening since 2017. It's had very severe impacts on the Rohingya people, and I cannot show you some videos and pictures that I've received from people living there, and Sheikh will also agree with me, it's very disturbing. But the people are living there, over 2 million people currently across the border, living in makeshift shelters, and they are being trafficked every day. So initially there were 700,000 that fled, and it's going up and up and up. And these people, they're not being welcomed by neighbouring countries. Violence and persecution, they're being left alone. They are stateless people. There's health and sanitation issues, education disruption, emotional trauma. There's no international aid getting to these people, and there is an uncertain future. How many in 5 years these children are going to grow up, 10, 15, 20 years? Where are they going to go? Where are they going to learn? How are they going to make a livelihood? There's little progress or any resolution to this crisis. Palestine. This is obviously the key issue that I think affects many people today. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but we know how big of an issue this is. Since 1967, or since 1948, there were initially 700,000 people that were displaced. Now that's turned into 5 million people, all growing up in surrounding countries, in the West Bank, in Gaza. It's a very, very big issue, and we're going to come to an example of what's happening here. But we've seen the devastation that's happened across the country, and these people have nowhere to go, no livelihoods. Where are they going to go, and who is going to offer them help? Well, not much international aid is getting through, so the legal ways get in. Pandemics, global health crises. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but we've all lived through COVID-19. I can say I've lived through a pandemic now. But what happened during COVID-19? While economics paralysed, millions of people lost their jobs, became vulnerable to exploitation. Border closures and travel restrictions disrupted legal migration and employment pathways, leaving many without options. So traffickers capitalised on the desperation of individuals seeking work and trying to return home, luring them into exploitative situations under the guise of offering help. Additionally, things like lockdowns and social distancing, it made it a lot more difficult for victims to be trafficked physically. So what happened? Traffickers changed to doing things online. The way we all went to moving online, working from online, doing things online. And doing things online is much harder to catch because anyone can do it living from their living room. Other ideas of pandemics, we've had the Ebola outbreak in Africa, which has been going on for many years. The HIV and AIDS epidemic, cholera outbreaks that happen very regularly in all sorts of war zones, and Yemen, in Sudan, where there's currently 5 million people who are also displaced. Economic crises. Now this it looks at impact on countries with weak or underdeveloped economies. So we've had economic crises here in the UK. We feel it a little bit. It's like, I can't buy the sandwiches I want, I can't do this, can't go on holiday. But countries who are already suffering suffer even more. If governments are unable to provide sufficient social safety nets to people, traffickers step in and they try to provide these services in the worst of ways. I'm going to touch briefly on Venezuela's economic collapse. There's 3 videos here you'll see running simultaneously. The top left video is the rise and the fuel of the sex trade in Venezuela. On the right, you see there, begging for food. Children, families, women are begging for food daily. This is the richest country in the world, one with the most oil, but unfortunately due to dictatorship, corruption, and many other issues within the country, it's sparking. And on the bottom there, we have a video of mothers giving away their babies because they have nothing. The bond between a mother and a child is so strong. And what compels them to go so far is to give them away for basic necessities to survive. How far do they have to go to give them up? People say they're going to die for their children. How far do they have to go to get this? Extreme poverty has jumped by 40%. Deaths related to child malnutrition, and millions of people have fled the country in the past 2 years. We've had mass displacement of 7 million Venezuelans, hyperinflation, meaning people's money is not worth anything at all. With healthcare collapses, food insecurity, it goes on and on. This is a YouTuber here. This is something that I advise you all to look at. This is a YouTuber named Bolden Bancroft. He recently undertook a harrowing journey along with Venezuelan families who were smuggled through the notorious Darien Gap. It's 160 kilometers wide and 50 kilometers in length. And the Darien Gap is a natural yet deadly barrier. And for desperate souls seeking peace and redemption, they're going through this hardship, a journey of basically a living nightmare, filled with dangers in every step, wild animals, tropical storms, merciless brutality. Many do not survive. Bodies of the fallen are left behind, scattered along the path. And beyond the unforgiving environment lies an even darker menace, the lawlessness that reigns in this desolate no man's land. Criminal gangs, drug traffickers, smugglers, they prey on these vulnerable people just seeking better life. Environmental crisis, speed through this one, but I'm going to touch here on the famine and droughts. For example, the Horn of Africa in 2011, where 1 million people across Somalia, Ethiopia and Kenya fled in search of food, water and safety. We had widespread starvation, 260,000 people, and half of them children under the age of 5. Millions face extreme hunger, and of course we had health crises, livelihoods missing. What about vulnerabilities? Well, we'll talk about the increase in vulnerabilities. Now, people think that, vulnerabilities only emerge during a crisis, but that couldn't be further from the truth. We must examine and address the existing vulnerabilities that are always present in areas and we consider developed, and maybe even the hidden cracks in the system. Economic instability, people living in poverty are already at higher risk due to the resources and education and employment. Countries with weak institutions may struggle to protect their populations from exploitation. Marginalization, people such as women, children, ethnic minorities, and the disabled are already vulnerable due to discrimination and unequal access. Lack of preparedness, environmental degradation, poor health care. When a crisis happens, we see an increase in this. So when a crisis occurs, the nature of human trafficking changes. Traffickers are quick to adapt, exploiting the chaos and uncertainty to their advantage. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, traditional forms of trafficking such as forced labor and sex trafficking became very difficult to maintain, like I said, due to lockdowns, travel restrictions, tighter border control. And in response to this, traffickers modified their methods to continue preying on vulnerable individuals. This shift during the pandemic was a rise of online trafficking. With more people spending time online, they capitalized on this. And it increases. Those already marginalized face greater threats. Separation from family and future support networks break down community ties and don't allow people to get the help they need. It's very worrying, and it's just on the rise. And the last one we have is after crises. So sometimes crises last a very long time. Sometimes they're short, like an earthquake, and the immediate effects, the first few hours, the first few days. But what happens after that? How do they rebuild after? How do they survive? We have prolonged displacement, people moving permanently because they can't go back to a country which is destroyed. Weak economic recovery, many people in poverty can't get what they need and can't do it. Unemployment, desperation, they make them very easy targets for exploitation. We have trauma and mental health, someone touched on that earlier, and there's a very good page in the booklet about psychological impacts and trauma. And the lack of reintegration and rehabilitation means people may even get re-trafficked even when they are saved. I'm just going to touch on a few examples because I think we are running out of time. More than 50,000 child migrants went missing in Europe between 2021 and 2023. That ring any bells here? 50,000 children in Europe have been missing. The situation is very alarming. 850 children missing from Dutch asylum shelters. In Article 22 of the United Nations International Convention on Rights of the Child, it states that when a child flees from another country alone, that country must protect and help that child. That country is also obligated to help the child find their family. You can see the failing we have there. 850 children went missing from care. These aren't just roaming, these are people in care. Death, abuse, torture. The traffickers hold fleeing Rohingya to ransom for up to £3,000 a time. We look at the plight of the Rohingya refugees who are fleeing persecution in Myanmar only to fall into the hands of human traffickers. These traffickers exploit the refugees' desperation and their lack of legal protection. A former broker in the camps who was paid almost £300 for each person he could persuade to even make the journey. He's persuading people, paying people to flee so they can find a better place. And not only are they charging people, they're paying people to try and make this journey to later make more money from them. It's very worrying. Concerns about organ theft in Palestine. This has been reported in many places. Organ trafficking is on the rise all around the world, and this is happening during crises. Nepal earthquake leaves bitter legacy as children become quarry for traffickers. In 2015, the Nepal earthquake had a very big impact on children, highlighting the rise in human trafficking due to this disaster. Many children were left orphaned, separated from families. Traffickers exploited this chaos, and many ended up in forced labor or sexual exploitation. In Ukraine, thousands of vulnerable children are unaccounted for. I'm saying Ukraine because this is on everyone's doorstep. People must know a Ukrainian person is living with them and knows the horror of what's happening. Children are going missing, women are going missing, and we are not batting an eyelid. This is a bit of a different story here. In Hurricane Katrina, when it happened, I think it was 2001 or 2006, I was very young at the time, so I don't very much. But people were brought from India to help rebuild America. Pipe builders, welders. And what happened? They were promised well-paid jobs, green cards, and instead they were issued temporary visas that bound them to a single employer at well below the minimum wage. And still today, these people are stuck in these situations. I'm not going to go too much, I'm going to skip through these slides because we haven't got much time, but I want to touch on why education and awareness is very important. This was an article which came out just a few days ago. It talked about Human Rights Monitor, a charity like us, who went and trained people from the port system. And what happened is, they see a rise in people detecting and saying, we've seen a sign. You've all got these on your hair, spotting the signs of human trafficking, modern-day slavery. There's 2-3 pages in the booklet which talks about them, and we've got a trifold leaflet here with a little bit more details, where it touches on how important it is. If you don't know the signs, and when you do know, you see it everywhere you go. Maybe, yeah, we're going to get to that. One sign may not always be, 2-3 signs, maybe someone's in a bad situation, but when you see many signs at once, ask, offer help, and talk to them. American Airlines, latest news, they've also intensified with expanded and mandatory training for all of their forward-facing staff. This is what we need to do. If you guys have an organization, if you have a work, tell them that you want to. If you want to run it, if you want us to run it, we'll run a course, make it 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 1 hour, a half a day. We'll run a course teaching you how to spot these signs. So when you know, it's easier for you to spot the signs. Now comes to the booklet. I think people have spoken about this booklet already, but we created it all about human trafficking, modern-day slavery, to provide a comprehensive understanding of this very critical issue. And we are distributing this free of charge along with all of our other leaflets. And our goal is to ensure everyone has access to this very important information, regardless of their background or their circumstances. So if everyone can open up their booklets, please. You've all got it on your chair. I know some people have already highlighted some very important areas, but if everyone can turn to page 13, recruitment techniques. Read a couple of them on there. We spoke about them already. During crises, do any of these things happen? Do we see false promises every day from our governments, from our aid workers, from fellow charities, from family members? Do we see abduction? We heard from Aki earlier on, she was nearly abducted here in the UK. There's a very good video online which talks about abduction as well. Do we see friendships and families selling their children, selling their family members? Yes, we saw that in Venezuela. We see this all around the world. Trafficking within communities, kidnapping, drugging, this happens all around us. And if we turn now, everyone, to page 22, please. The end user. I think someone said this earlier on, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. But without a demand, the trade wouldn't exist. Why have, in the UK since 2020, we went from 100,000 slaves in the UK to last year 130,000, to the latest figure I saw yesterday, 136,000. This number is growing. We have slavery here in the UK, and London is the most rampant city here in the UK. And people need to open their eyes. It's very important. So I'm not going to go too much on it, but key contacts and first responders are on the last page, guys. If there's an emergency, call 999. If you want advice, talk to any of these numbers. And if you want to talk to us directly, you have my number directly. You've seen that already. The last thing I wanted to touch on is our sticker campaign. So I'm going to pass some of these around. These are our stickers. And you can see a few pictures of where we put these on here. And we don't condone any sort of littering or anything like that. We put these stickers and we're going to give them out to people to put in areas where they will be seen the most. On lampposts where people have already stuck stickers. On phone boxes where people use drugs and where people are held. And on other sorts of advertising. Zebra crossings, yes. So if anyone wants to grab some traffic lights, that sort of thing, we don't condone any sort of places that will cause an obstruction to any organisations or anything like that. Only in public places and on publicly owned items.
But don't do what Ali did with the police car behind. Yeah, I don't think you saw that.
It's okay. The police will agree with me. Well, hopefully they do. And I'm just like the last thing I want to catch on before time runs out and before everyone jumps into the lovely food is probably around the 22nd of December. We're trying to get the date confirmed. This isn't the final design. This is just a mock-up I made. It's a very weird design. We're trying to do a run to stop. Now, you heard that? Run to stop. So your run, we've got a nice 2.5 kilometre trail all around Hyde Park, ending in Lancaster, starting and ending in Lancaster Gate, to raise awareness about this. We'll tell people when we're running past them, do you know that trafficking is happening here, in your community, just half a mile away? You must know, you pass by them every day. And not only are we doing that, we're raising money for this charity, so we can print more booklets, we can give out leaflets while we're on the run, and at the same time we'll have a little event where we'll talk about the issue as well. So I'd like to thank everyone else for attending this wonderful event. I really hate that we have to talk about this issue. I'd like to just introduce Saf, who's going to talk briefly about the psychological impacts of human trafficking. Thank you very much.
You know what, I'm not going to talk about psychological impact because I think it's all in the book.